If you're looking for the easiest way to set up a Flask app with authentication and authorization, then this video is for you. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to how to set up Flask-Security in a Flask app, show you the different things that I can do and how easy it is to set up. So in this video, I'm going to use Flask-SQL Alchemy Lite, but the principles apply for any database system that you have set up. But in my case, I'm using Flask-SQL Alchemy Lite. So with that said, let's get into building this Flask-Security example app. Okay, so to get started, I'm going to start from scratch. I have nothing yet in my project, just a virtual environment. So let me start by installing the things that I need. I need to install Flask. I'll install Flask-SQL Alchemy Lite. I'll install Flask-Security, of course, and I want Common to install the other packages that go along with Flask-Security and the features that we're going to use today. And then setup tools. Setup tools is just to get one particular thing working. So I'm just going to add that so we don't have any problems during this video. So installing everything. And now that that's done, let's create a basic Flask app. So I'll create a directory called app. Inside of app, I'll create a file called dunder-init.py. And then inside of this file, I'll create the basics of a Flask app. And then I'll create the create app function. I'll instantiate Flask with dunder name, and then I'll return app. All right, so let me export Flask debug to be on. And then if I do Flask run, we should see the app is running now on port 5000. Let me just open that up. I have no routes defined yet, so it's 404. And before we go any further, I want to show you a command that is going to be useful. This is called Flask routes. So instead of Flask run, just do Flask routes. And we see here, I only have one route set up. So one route for the static endpoint. So the reason why I'm showing you this is because once I get Flask-Security set up, it's going to automatically add some routes for us without me having to add them myself. So now let's bring in Flask-Security. So there are two parts to this that I need. First, I need the models for Flask-Security because it is an extension that deals with your users. So I need a user model, and I'll also need a role model. So let me go over to models.py. So from SQL Alchemy.orm, I'm going to import declarative base. And then also I want to import from Flask-Security.models, I want to import SQLA. So SQLA represents the models for a SQL Alchemy setup. So you could use different ORMs with this, but because we're using SQL Alchemy, we want to use the SQL Alchemy base models, and I'll show you how that's used in a second. So first, let me create my base model. So for this, I'll call it model, and I'll just pass. So I don't want to add any settings onto model. And then what I'll do is I'll associate this declarative base, so this model class, with this SQLA. So Flask-Security knows that this is my base model. So SQLA.fs model, so capital F, capital M, and then set_db info, and then base model equals model. So this is just telling Flask-Security that model is my base model. And then I can go ahead and create the main models. So I'll need a role model. So this will inherit from model, and it takes in a mixin from SQLA. So SQLA.fs role mixin. And then I need to provide a table name. So the table name here will be role. And then for the user model, same idea. So it's going to inherit model, my base model. And then I need to bring in a mixin as well. So fs user mixin. I need to supply a table name. So table name for this is going to be user. All right, so that's all I have to do to set up the database for Flask-Security. I just need to inherit these mixins and associate the base model with Flask-Security by calling this setDbInfo. So now let me create an extensions.py file. And in the extensions.py file, I want to set up two extensions. One will be Flask-SQL Alchemy Lite. So from Flask-SQL Alchemy Lite, import SQL Alchemy. And then the other will be Flask-Security. So import security, that's the name of the class. And then I'll just instantiate both of them here. So db equals SQL Alchemy and security equals security, just like this. So now let's go back to the dunder init and bring these two things in. So from .extensions, import db and security. And then also I want to bring in those two models. So from models import role user, they're not going to be used in this file, but by importing them here, it's going to be easy to create them on the command line, which we'll see in a second. And then also I want to import something from Flask-Security. So from Flask_Security, I want to import something called FSQLA Lite User Data Store. So the idea behind this is it's going to be another way to associate my models with Flask-Security. So let's go down here and let's call a init app on the DB. So db.init app, we're going to pass in the app. And then we need to instantiate the user data store. So user_data store. And I'm just going to copy this. And this takes in a DB and then the two models that I imported. So role and user. And then I can call a init app on security. So security.init app, pass in the app, and then pass in the user data store. All right, so now let's set up the configuration for this. So we need to set up the location of the database. So app config, and then we want SQL Alchemy engines. So we just want one database. So this will be default, and then SQLite, DB SQLite 3. And then we need the secret key. So I'll just say my secret key. And then finally, we need some kind of salt. So for security, password salt, I'll just put my salt. So this is for hashing the password. So obviously you want your salt to be more complicated and your secret key, but just to keep it simple for this video, I'm adding them here. So with this, I should have everything I need for the basics of Flask-Security. So let me run Flask routes again. And now we can see I have more routes. So before I only had static, but now I have login, logout, another static, and verify. So because I have login, let me go to the login page. Let me start the app first. So Flask run. And then here I can go to /login and we see a basic login form that takes in an email address and a password. So let me create a user account. And to do that, first I need to create the database. So I'll do Flask shell. And then I'll do from app models import model. And then I can do model.metadata.create all and then pass in the database engine like that. So that will create my instance directory with the SQLite table there. And now what I can do is I can use the commands that come with Flask-Security to create a user. So first, let me just run flask --help. And we see users here. So this users comes from Flask-Security. And if I do flask users --help, we see activate, create, deactivate, and so on. So I'm going to use this command to create a user. So flask users create, and then Anthony@prettyprinted.com. And I'll just put in a password. All right, and then we see my user account is not active. So let me go ahead and activate that user. So flask users activate, and then Anthony@prettyprinted.com. Okay, so it tells me user Anthony@prettyprinted.com has been activated. And now I should be able to log in. So let me do Flask run. Let me go back and let me try logging in. So Anthony@prettyprinted.com, the password I put in, which is just password1, and then we see not found. So this is good because it logged me in and then redirected me to what should be the home page. But of course I don't have that set up yet. But if I go to log out, we see that it logs me out as well. So I can go back to login. And I see the form again. So now let me create that home page. So what I'll do is I'll create a file called routes.py. And in it, I'll do from Flask import blueprint and render template. And also I want to do from Flask-Security import auth required because I want to protect a certain route that I create. So let me start off by creating the blueprint. This will be main and then dunder name and then main route /. So this will be the home page. And then I'll make this auth required. So auth_required. So this means you have to be logged in to see this page. And then I'll return render template with index.html, which I'll create right now. So let me go ahead and create a templates directory. And inside of the templates directory, I'll create index.html. And let me just create an h1 tag here. and I'll say hello. And then because this is auth required here, it's going to give me this object called current user. And then I can get any of the fields that are defined in the user model. So email is one of the fields. So it will say hello and then whatever the email is of the user who's logged in. So let me go to dundernit.py and then import that. So from routes import main. And then on the app, I just want to register that blueprint. So app register blueprint and then main, just like that. So let's go back over and let's go to the homepage, and we see this error. And this is kind of a weird error for a Python library, but I thought I'd show it. So it's simply because we don't have a function call here. Normally with these things, you don't need parentheses if you don't have any other things you want to pass in, but for this one, you need it. So now let me refresh and we see it takes me directly to the login page. So it tells me you must sign in to view this resource. So let me go ahead and sign in. Password 1, log in. And then it redirects me to the home page again. And now we see hello and then my email, anthony@prettyprinted.com. Okay, so now let's look at the routes again. So Flask routes. And notice I only have, log in and log out for the main routes that I'm using for Flask-Security. Of course, we see main.index because I just added that. But as I add more features to Flask-Security, we'll see more routes pop up. So let me go ahead and add another one. So you may have noticed that we have log in and log out, but how can a new user create an account? So if we go to dundernit, we can just add more configuration values. So let's do app config. And what we want to do is security, registerable, and set that equal to true. So now let me do Flask routes. And we see the security register endpoint. And by default, it will try to send emails every time a user registers. So let me disable that for a second. So security send register email is the configuration value. And let's set that to false. And also Flask-Security is going through a transition phase where they're switching out their registration system. So what we want to do is we want to future-proof everything by using security use register v2 and then just set that to true, right? So it works pretty much the same as v1, but they're just modifying the code. So let's just use v2. And now let's start the app and let's go to the register page. So let me log out first and let me go register. So we see the link here appears under the menu. Of course, you can modify these templates, but I'll create another account. Let's say anthony@gmail.com. And then I'll put in a password, hit register, and we see it logs me in and I see hello, anthony@gmail.com. So just to check the database, I'll click on it here and go to the users tables, and we see I have the two users here. So anthony@prettyprinted.com and anthony@gmail.com. And just like we turned on registration, there are other things we can turn on. So we can create a page where the user can recover their account. So if they lost their password or something, an email can be sent. I don't have emails enabled, but let me just put a Y there and then do Flask routes again. So Flask routes. And now we see a forgot password route appears. Then we can do something similar. We can do changeable, which means the user will be able to change their password. So now if I do Flask routes, we see change password here. And then there's confirmable, meaning the user has to confirm their account before they can do anything. And then we will see the confirm email route get created there, and also send confirmation. So these are other things that can be used if you go to any one of those routes when you're logged in. So for example, let me go to change password. If I remember the location correctly. Oh, it's just change. We see a form to change my password because I turned on that setting. So we've seen regular users. What if we wanted to create something like an admin user? So what I can do is I can create a role for like admin, and then I can create an admin only page. So let me do Flask --help again. And we actually see we have users here, but there's also roles. We can use that to create a new role. So we can do Flask roles create, and then I'm going to call this admin. And we see the admin role is created correctly. And then we can do Flask roles add. And then I'll make my first account, Anthony@prettyprinter.com, an admin user. So now let's look at the database. If we go to role, we see admin here. We see roles users. So user number 1 has role 1 and user number 1 is Anthony@prettyprinter.com. So now let's create an admin only routes. Let's call this main routes admin. And then I'm going to need a decorator called roles accepted. So let me import that, roles accepted, and it takes an admin here. And then I'll define the function for the route to be admin, and I'll return just admin like that. So admin everything. And then I'll try going to that page for both accounts. So right now, if I go back to the home page, I'm Anthony@gmail.com. So if I go to admin, it says forbidden. So let me log out, and then I'll log in with my first account, Anthony@prettyprinter.com, put in the password, and we see it requires confirmation. Let me go ahead and turn off confirmable, and I'll log in again so it doesn't stop me. So we see Anthony@prettyprinter.com, and then I can go to /admin, and we see admin here because that account is an admin user. Okay, so now let's customize things a little bit more. So the first thing I want to customize is, let me go to the app and log out and go to the register page. So right now for the registration, it's only asking for the email address, but for my app, I want to ask for the name as well. So to do that, what I can do is I can go to models, and then under the user model, I'll add a field for name. So this will be mapped stir string field, and let's just keep it simple. And then we need to import mapped, since we're using Flask SQL Alchemy Lite and just regular SQL Alchemy. And then I could migrate the database, but just to keep it simple, I'll delete the database that I have and just recreate it. So Flask shell, and then this should be in my history. So import model, and then create all. So now when I go here and I look at user, I see the name field is here along with the rest of the fields. So to be able to capture this name when the user registers, I need to modify the registration form. So what I'll do is I'll go to app and create a file called forms.py. And then I'll do from Flask-Security, import register form v2. And then from WT forms, I'm going to import string field and let's say validators, right? So I'm going to set up a form with the string field. So what I can do is I can create a custom version of the register form by inheriting the existing register form. So I'll call this extended register form, and it inherits from the original. So register form v2. And then I have the field. So name, this will be a string field, call it name. And then validators equals, and then in here, the list of validators will be data required. Just like that, and make sure that you spell everything correctly. There we go. So data required. And then in under init, I can bring in that form. So from forms, I'm going to import this extended register form. And then under security here, or in security, I'm going to pass this to register form. So register form equals the form that I just brought in. So just the class name. I don't have to instantiate it or anything. So now let me try running the app and let's see what happens. So if I go to the register form, we see the form still looks the same. And that's because there's one more thing that needs to be done. So now let's go over to my templates. And what I want to do is I want to create a subdirectory called security. And then in here, I'm going to create a template called register_user. So this is going to overwrite the existing one. So let me restart the app. And if I go here and refresh, we see that everything is gone. And that's because this new template is blank. This template represents the registration page. So to get this to work, we can extend the one that we have. And one way you can do it is you can go to your environment here, and then you can go to lib, and then you can look for Flask-Security, expand that, and then look for templates, and then just look for the name of the template that you're modifying. So register user, and then just copy all of this and paste it into the custom one. So the one we just took from in the environment. That's the one that it uses by default, but we basically want that form with just one extra field. So if I refresh here, we see the original registration page again. And let me make a change. Let's say hello register. If I refresh here, we see hello. So we know we are modifying this file, and maybe let's say create accounts. So create account, that's probably a better message to put. Yeah, create account. And now I just want to add the name field. So somewhere in here, let's say before the email, I just want to follow the same pattern. So above where the email is, I'm just going to do render field with errors, just following the same pattern. I'll do register user form dot name because I added the name on the form. And then if I refresh, we see the name field. And then I can just fill in my name. So Anthony, and then I can do Anthony@prettyprinter.com, password 1. Click register. We see my name here. If I go to the database, go to user, now we see Anthony has appeared as my name along with the rest of the information here. So this is just the beginning of the stuff that you can do with Flask-Security. My goal for this video was to just show you how to set everything up and show you like how to configure it. But basically everything beyond this is just using these configuration values to turn on the things that you want. So if you look at the documentation for Flask-Security, you'll see the different options that you have, and you can see what you can turn on and turn off in your app. So if you're interested in learning more about Flask-Security, I have other videos. I'll have videos on how to use email. I'll have videos on how to use Celery and so on. So if you're interested in that, check out one of those videos.